All right, folks, welcome back once again to the longest running show in the world about data. It's time for DM Radio. Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh. I am so excited, folks, to have with me two experts in, the central topic of the analytics industry, analytic engines, the engines that actually crank out the number crunching that you use to understand your data. And boy, how things have changed. I mean, when this show began in 2008, and yes, we turn 17 next month, there were some great vendors. Teradata was still ruling the roost. We weren't quite into the Cloudera era, but that was about to start. And then, of course, we had Hortonworks and MapR and all these other companies that came along. And then, as the elephant was sort of fading, as people figured out that this Hadoop stuff and HDFS was pretty cumbersome and didn't really do everything they wanted, as they figured out that MapReduce would not solve all the world's problems, another company started coming up. A couple of them. One was called Databricks. One was called Snowflake. And we have Franco Patano from Databricks on the line today. I've been researching their latest innovations, and it's just mind-blowing, the things that they're working on over there. And we also have Rogers, Jeffrey, Leo, John from a company called DataChat, and one of their co-founders. And the other co-founder was on the show last year, who spent some time in Pittsburgh. So yours truly is in the Pittsburgh area these days. And I always joke that when I tell people I'm from Pittsburgh on Zoom calls, later in the call they say, "So how's Philadelphia?" And I say, "I don't know. It's a long way away." But it's okay. Philly gets all the attention, is what I'm saying. Pittsburgh is a cool place to be. But with that, let's bring in Franco Patano. Franco, I've been looking up at the advances you're making at Databricks, and it's really impressive. And one of the things I like is AI throughout the stack and using AI to optimize things like performance and things like data storage, like how you're working with your data. So just walk us through some of the big innovations you've come up with lately and tell us how that's helping your clients.
Yeah. Hey, Eric, thanks for having me on, and thanks to your audience for tuning in. Really appreciate you all. Um, we're so happy to be here. So, I've been at Databricks going on 6 years here, and kind of how when I first got here, I was like a data warehousing and BI person when I came, and Databricks was still the big data ML company back then, and they knew they wanted to go in the data warehousing space. And I remember I used to write blogs, give webinars, give talks about how to get great performance by tuning all the knobs in
Right.
in Apache Spark and Delta to get great performance, right? And over the years, we've hired brilliant product people from all over. Some of my favorite competitors. A lot of them we hire out of school, and then we hire all their best friends who are really smart. Well, as my co-founder likes to say. But basically, over the years, I've had a few of these PMs come to me and be like, "Hey, listen, can't we reduce the number of knobs? Can't we make this simpler?" Especially now that we have like AI here that can kind of handle some of this. And absolutely, I mean, it's not rocket science yet. It's just figuring out how to like tune all these things given your workloads. And so this year, in 24, we launched something called predictive optimization.
Hmm.
And predictive optimization basically takes a look at all the queries that the users are firing off, and it understands the queries and like where the data is and what tables, what columns they're selecting, and it actually pushes optimizations into the file format, so the data at rest on the data lakes, and it kind of manages all the complexity for you, given how the users are querying the system,
Hmm.
and it constantly does this. Actually, a couple novel things that it does. It actually has a model to determine if it should do an operation.
Hmm.
It won't do the operation unless it has ROI, meaning that it's going to make queries faster and cheaper, and it has a floor. So if it's not going to give you performance benefit, it's not going to waste your money to do it, because the customer pays for compute time for these services to run, right?
Hmm.
So some novel innovations there. And what's interesting is we had some early customers just turn it on. One of the famous ones that we use on all our slides was that the battery and cable company Anker. You probably have some devices from them. They're great Databricks customers. You should buy more of their stuff. But essentially, they turned on predictive optimization, and you can see in the chart exactly when they turned it on because their storage costs dropped by half. They halved their
Wow.
storage costs and they got double the performance. So their query execution times went down by half. So they got double the performance, half of the storage costs. And they're like, what is this voodoo that you just turned on for us? And we're like, listen, we took like decades of experience in data warehousing and AI systems and everything you need to know. And we basically created a model to do all these things and to tune it. And that's kind of what it did. And now, actually, there's a lot more that it does now. Now, as of this latest release, um, in data warehousing and data systems, one of the other things besides having your data right, having the right file sizes on disk and having the right clustering and all those things, data at rest, right? One of their biggest things is for the query optimizer to have good stats. And there are tons of programs and query tuning. One of my favorites is Brent Ozar from the SQL Server world. Tons of content on how to tune queries. And if you boil it all down to it's, does the optimizer have the right stats, right? Does the query, is it generating the right query plan? And so you can do this manually in Databricks. And it's like one of my top three performance tuning items is, did you collect stats for the Metastore? And now we actually have predictive optimization has automatic stats collection, and it's actually scalable. It's the old one was naive. It would collect stats on everything like all at once, and it was very expensive as data volumes grew. This new one is actually scalable. It's much more efficient in how it does it. So now, not only does predictive optimization get your data right at rest, but it also gets the query right by choosing the right plan and joint strategy with that plan. So lots of innovation there, not just on data at rest, but data that is being queried. So query plan intelligence, so that we're optimizing the whole stack from rest to execution all the way up to BI. And
Yeah,
so those are some of the things that we released.
that's crazy. I mean, really, it's very, very impressive because I've thought, just to give you some context, when this show first started in 2008, I had been in the industry about 3 or 4 years formally. Well, no, actually longer than that, I guess. It was like 7 years. 2001 is when I worked for a consultancy in Austin that did ETL and data warehousing jobs and things of this nature. And it didn't take me too long to figure out, man, these ETL jobs, like all these batch windows ratcheted up, and then you've got 24/7, all these windows you have to hit. There's no agility. You just have to, follow the rules and get all this stuff in. And I thought to myself, I would ask vendors, how much visibility do you have into redundancy of data movement? And did you really have to move this data? Is that data getting used? All these questions. They're like, what are you talking about? Like, no, we just move the data and go on to the next part of our job. And now what you're talking about is being able to sense what is getting used, how it's getting used, what's getting queried, what the results of that query are, and all that you put into a model to optimize the architecture of where the data is stored, how the data is accessed, what the actual runtime looks like. I mean, that is amazing. So you're basically honing it down to, or chiseling it down, I guess, to the essential processes, the essential functions and data, and only working on that to generate business value. Is that about right?
Yeah. Uh, Instead of how I kind of explain is you can pay a data engineer, data warehousing architect, a lot of money to manually go through because they're humans, right? Can some of them create scripts? Absolutely. But they have to reason about, they have to reason about how are the users going to query the system. And most of the time they don't know. Most of the time they're relying on business people or business analysts
Right.
in,
Right.
in the game of enterprise telephone, as I like to call it, right? To tell them like what are they going to be querying, and God knows if it's right. Like they have no idea. They're only given the information they have, and yeah, you can either pay these very expensive people to go out there and do this one time for you. Or maybe they have some scripts that keep things fresh. Um, we took decades of experience in building these systems and we built AI models to do that on your behalf in real time and constantly monitoring the system on your behalf to do it for you. And most people are like, where do I sign up for the AI, right? Like,
Right.
why would I pay humans to do this? I think you should still have humans in the loop to validate that it's doing the right things. And that's what we have is the AI emits all of its metadata to a system table. And now architects don't have to worry about like the being pedantic about all the little things. They can just say, okay, I think the AI is doing the right things, or I don't like this thing. Let me go in and change. But it kind of lets them get to a higher layer of abstraction where they're not so inundated in like the little things. So as I like to say, we're not getting rid of your people. We're making them more efficient.
Yeah.
We're optimizing away the boring stuff or the minutia.
Well, and if you think about how much time and effort used to go into all of these mundane tasks and just how unpleasant those tasks can be to execute, and then you figure the creative push that you get by freeing the developers of all that sort of tedium, it's like a double whammy of value, right?
Yeah, and God forbid one of your jobs fails and your entire schedule of optimization is thrown off, and now someone's got to go in there to kind of like recover and pick up all the pieces. Yeah, it can be a night. It's a full-time job for most people. You know, I used to. There's a lot of jokes in industry. So, some you know warehouse architects used to have two jobs because they would just kind of work both at the same time. Just their scripts are running most of the time, right? You don't need to be active all the time, right? If you know what you're doing. But nowadays, I don't think that that's the case anymore. But essentially, like, why would you want to worry about the little things if you didn't have to?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. And let's bring in Rogers here to kind of comment on some of that stuff and let us know what he's working on. But Rogers, what Franco was talking about here, I think, is really the next phase of evolution for these technologies to leverage AI to build models that understand how engines work and give you visibility into what you can do to improve them, and then ideally automate that process. Right now, I know DataChat, you come up with this idea of letting Gen AI serve as the linguistic model of interacting with data, right? Tell us about what you thought of everything that Franco just said and then what you guys are working on.
Right. Yeah. So first, hello everyone. Nice to be on this show. And so this was some really great points from Franco. So essentially, like the AI is, the potential of AI is essentially amazing in the sense that, a lot of these manual one-off stuff that the humans had to be involved and probably takes days or even weeks for them to actually optimize even a single query. So before my data chat stint, I used to work in the data team in one of the large gaming companies, and then we used to go around to like, hey, tell me what your queries are, what queries are critical, what queries are slower. Let me create an index. Let me create this particular storage layout, and all of that. So all of this stuff is now being done in a matter of a few hours or seconds, just and that's great potential. Like time saved is a lot, and this is just really a start. And as like Franco mentioned, and the key to all of this is collecting more data and statistics around what
Mm-hmm.
your query patterns are, and tuning in the sense like not manually tuning but automatically tuning your organization of the data, the compute around it, so that you get efficiency in all fronts. And that's really great. And just switching to what we do in DataChat. So DataChat is a Gen AI based no code data analytics platform for business users that lets them just gain insights from the data by talking to data in plain English.
Yeah, and let's kind of dive into that a little bit. I mean, the shortcomings of large language models in particular are that, at least historically, they don't have this epistemological barrier, meaning they don't know what they don't know. And when you trigger that reality, you get some nonsense. It's just like Gen AI early in the game told me I had written 3 books. I was like, really? Did I? I don't remember doing that. That's pretty cool. I mean, did I black out for a couple years? No, it just made that stuff up or it conflated me with someone else. How do you temper that? How do you make sure that what people are seeing in the language that comes out of the engine does in fact reflect exactly what's in the data?
That is a really great question. So one of the main things, crucial things for anything to do with AI or Gen AI to succeed is you need to provide the right context to the model and the right business context. And the right business context can be in multiple forms. For example, if you're talking to a data, if your data has been set up in a certain way, perhaps by database engineers, they even have your column names that correspond to their own understanding of your business, but when it comes to business users, they can't relate to it, right? So providing the right semantics of around data, right? That can be as simple as changing your column names or setting up a semantic layer that can provide business information and that can be fed to the AI is crucial for getting better and accurate results from the AI model.
Hmm. That's interesting. So, do you have a sort of RAG model, this retrieval augmented generation? Is that what you're employing on in your engine or in your workflow?
Yeah, a part of it is yes. Yeah, definitely there's a whole, I would say, spectrum of solutions that we take to tackle this problem. So the first step is how do we actually validate what the AI generated is matches what we think, right? So
Mhm.
we take an interesting approach there by actually not asking the AI to generate code, but instead asking the AI to give how you would solve this problem in based on some specific data functions or steps. Think of it as sub-steps of SQL, and then use that to deterministically generate SQL or any other Python program that runs against your data warehouse. So, but in terms of also providing the right context to the users, we also explain what the steps are in plain English so that someone can just quickly go and validate it instead of just blindly trusting what Gen AI has given to you as the response. So it's very similar to chain of thought, but you can think of it as a much more user-friendly chain of thought than actually reading through an entire SQL code to understand whether the model gave you the right answer. So that's kind of one way we approach the problem. And to just talk about the business semantics part, yes, we also have a RAG-based approach where you can encode all of your business semantics, give data hints, business hints just in terms of plain English, and based on your question, we contextually retrieve that from our RAG pipeline and feed it into the LLM. So you get so the LLM can get more business context to answer your question.
Yeah, I mean that's a very clever architecture. I think that is one of the best ways to get value from these things because they're very, very powerful engines. You know, the fact that you can now talk to computers in human language in and of itself is a massive innovation that is going to let us get more power from the machines. You used to have to be able to speak machine or at least SQL or some programming language to really tease out the answers that you wanted. And that is just not the case anymore. Although you know, these things take a long time to really take root. I remember Progress Easy Ask from like 15, 16 years ago, where you'd ask a question and it would, in natural language, and it would give you the SQL underneath. So it's like these things have been around, but they weren't really performant. They weren't really widespread. And that's what's happening right now. And it's happening at blazing speed. Well, folks, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back with our guest. You're listening to DM Radio.
These might
All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, talking all things analytic engines like Databricks or DataChat. There are quite a few others out there, but Databricks is a juggernaut these days. I think they just passed Snowflake in terms of market cap based upon their recent revenue raise, a round J. That's pretty interesting, pretty impressive stuff. And I've known Ali Ghodsi for, gosh, I guess about 12 or 13 years now. I remember the early days. He's a very savvy businessman, and he's made some really, really compelling decisions. You know, grabbing Mosaic ML, for example, grabbing Tabular. That was like, what just happened? But let's get back into AI and BI because traditional BI, of course, has been around for a long time, very valuable, but fairly manual. AI is much more dynamic, and if you get it right, will optimize all sorts of things. So AI, at least in the Databricks world now, is making BI much simpler and much more scalable. You want to talk about that for a minute, Franco?
yeah. Uh, so what is super interesting here is that one thing that I consistently hear from our customers is I need to be able to democratize data. I think a lot of the data vendors use this as their kind of in their marketing, but what does that really mean? Like, and if you think about, like, I actually think about it in terms of government. We actually live in a republic because representatives represent us in government. Democracy is actually like I have direct influence in what happens, and that's
Right.
what it means. Is like data democratizing data means that me as a user, I get access to the data and I'm interacting with it myself. Someone's not representing me because usually a representative would be like a BI dashboard. Would be like something that would represent data, but usually the user couldn't touch the data themselves, right? And This goes to one of my favorite follow-up questions. I usually, when I'm giving a presentation, I'll ask, after you made a brand new dashboard, what's the first follow-up question you'll get? And if you've designed it to spec and everything is there, generally it's, can I export this to Excel? Right? And why is that? Well, you know what? Your dashboard's great, but I have my own bespoke questions to ask it. I have follow-up questions. I want to, we call it drill into or drill down. I want to drill into this. I want to understand why this metric is, it looks like that, right? And so we didn't have, I think Tableau tried to do NLP on top of data a decade ago, and it never really took off. But what we have now with Gen AI, with these large language models, especially when GPT came out, we have the ability to actually get better NLP out of our with these use cases. And so some things that we've done is, you know, making these dashboards super simply without having to take 10, 20 hours or 40 hours of training in something like a Power BI and Tableau. In Databricks and our AI BI dashboards, you just prompt it for the visualization you want. So create me a bar chart of revenue over time, and it just creates it for you, right? You prompt it and it creates it. Uh, I think you might have mentioned something last segment about we can talk to these computers in natural language, right? Just like in Star Trek, you know, like computer shields up, right? And then
Right.
does it, right? And they didn't have to interact with it. I always found it interesting. What was Data and all the science officers doing on the computers like this in the background when you could talk to it? Like what the hell were
Right.
they doing, right? Like that's probably data engineers, right? Or
That's
data.
pretty funny.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, no,
but
this is, I mean, this is really fascinating. And I think you're also speaking to, again, this wave of behavioral change, like how you interact with these systems. And I'm reminded that I think mindset is going to be one of the big hindrances now, just getting people to realize you don't have to do things this old-fashioned way. I mean, you used to spend days and weeks, building out dashboards. Now, if you have live access to the data, to your point, you can just type in a few words, give me a bar chart with customer in Northeast region and who bought more than $50,000 in the last month. And it's like, boom, there it is. I mean, that is just head and shoulders above the old way of doing things because you're saving tremendous amounts of time, even if what you discover is that what you're asking is not that important, right?
Exactly. One of my follow-up questions and usually when I talk to customers, we're talking about their strategies. And it's like, well, I have 1,000 dashboards we have to migrate. And I'm like,
No.
do you need 1,000 dashboards?
Right.
Or do you need like 5 with a self-service agent,
Right.
right? To answer the bespoke things that they'll have. And they're like, oh, I've never thought about it that way. And that leads to like the innovation that Databricks did over the past year with our AI BI dashboards to handle this what I call the scalable self-service problem, which is you can create a dashboard, but then it actually comes with a little chat window that you can chat with the data model in that dashboard and drill down to it right there. And
Wow.
it will write the queries for you, fire them off on the back end, and come back to you and show you the result. And you don't have to export to Excel anymore. So it's like, do you need to learn VLOOKUP anymore now if you get this agent that just knows your data? But something that you all talked about last segment is the agent has to understand the data itself. And
Hmm.
one thing that we have found at Databricks, we also had the innovation of Unity Catalog, but having the complete metadata. And one of the crucial innovations in Unity was the AI generated fields like table descriptions, catalog descriptions, all
Interesting.
that information. Turns out if you infuse metadata into your catalog, and then you feed that metadata into these agents to be able to answer these questions, the context that they have, we know context is king or queen, depending upon how you rule the world in these LLMs, right? So you give them all the context that we have, AI generated too, that these business people validate, we get so much better answers. Like I have people saying, like, I can't believe it understood this one archaic term that we have in our company. Well, it's in the table description, right? So of course we pulled it, the LLM pulled it from there. So essentially, how do you scale self-service? I think once the knowledge, kind of the tribal knowledge, gets fed into Unity Catalog and it's centralized, and then we're also working on a metrics layer this year. Once we have the metrics and the knowledge, I think the self-service agents, we call it Genie, kind of the natural language question answering inside of the AI BI dashboards. I think it gets much smarter and it's able to give much accurate answers. So that's kind of what we're thinking about with scalable self-service with AI.
Yeah, and I'll throw one question at you, and then we'll bring Rogers back in. We did a show a couple years ago on sunsetting applications and other enterprise fairy tales, joking that it's so hard to kill an enterprise application. Once it's out there and being used, good luck taking it down. But now is the time to do that, it seems to me. Your comment about dashboards is, I mean, is really quite remarkable because you're right. In many large organizations, they have thousands of these dashboards. They're paying for all of them to be maintained. And of course, many of them are not being actively maintained. They're just sitting out there. Many of them aren't even being used. So if you can see into these environments and use machine learning to capture who's using and what and where, to capture what the data is hot, which data is cold, all that stuff, and use that as in your model to optimize the architecture. I mean, you saved like 96% of your time and energy if you take that approach, right?
I'll up the ante a little bit. Uh, what happens when a user extracts to Excel, all the ungodly things that they did to that unfortunate data on that spreadsheet is
Right.
stuck
It's
inside that
gone.
spreadsheet
Right, it's
silo in a
gone.
box on their laptop, right?
That's right.
With Genie, we capture all the questions and we surface it up for the room builder, and we show every question answer pair that users asked, what question they asked, what they got. And that it actually helps them build better dashboards or design better data rooms or Genie rooms to answer these questions. So absolutely, like there's a mess of things going on in these enterprises. I think there's optimization ripe for the picking. There's tons of low-hanging fruit. I think we should question everything. You don't need 1,000 dashboards. You need maybe 10, and some
Right.
really good self-service capabilities, I think, is the future.
Yeah, I have to agree. And I'll throw it over to Rogers to kind of comment on that, on the old way of doing things, because there's this long legacy of how we got here and all these tools and approaches and methods and consultants who do things, and that's just the way things were done. And it was very time consuming. And I mean, so much of that can and should go right out the window. What do you think, Rogers?
Yeah, I totally agree. I guess dashboards have served their use. Make no mistakes, that dashboards will still serve their use, but they have a very specific purpose. If you're looking for a certain KPI and that's all you need, you don't need any other thing. You just need a dashboard. You just look at the chart, refresh it, and you're done for making a business decision. But now comes the question of what's next? I need to understand what's going on a little bit more based on what I observed in the dashboard. And that's where all of these self-service capabilities come in. And I've been thinking about like self-service, and the term self-service has been around for a long time, but have they been truly self-service? Because typically when people talk about self-service, they'll give you a tool, you need to learn the tool, and then when you have a question, now you still need to understand what buttons do I click and what
Right.
sequence do I click to actually get the answer. That is not
Right.
self-service.
Right.
You need a business question and you should be just able to ask it directly. And that's what Gen AI has empowered people to do. Of course, there are some caveats with using Gen AI, right? You need to be able to provide the right context. It needs to understand the history of what you've asked. And Gen AI sometimes will not get your question right. So you need to be able to iterate on the data, provide hints. So you need to be able to understand how Gen AI has thought about your question so that you can refine your question and get better answers and better value out of Gen AI. So yeah, so I totally agree.
Well, and just the amount of time that is saved, and you think about the example of thousands of dashboards. I cannot tell you the number of companies I've talked to who have thousands of dashboards, and obviously they're not being used. But historically, it was difficult to track and manage and build models around that stuff. It was just too expensive. But we've seen really in the last few years, all those cost dynamics change dramatically. And once you can find a way to optimize this entire stack, to not go down that road, I think is downright perilous. What do you think, Rogers?
Yeah. So, and the cost of the dashboards are essentially, you create a dashboard, you invest significant amount of time, then you replicate those dashboards, and pretty much you end up with a whole array of dashboards that sometimes you don't even look at, and you get essentially get into a dashboard nightmare and maintenance. And those dashboards are still driving compute, make no mistake, right? Because
Right.
they are
Right.
there, they make queries, they're probably running in a schedule, and you kind of don't know what's going on. So it's not about just like them being idle, but also costing money for the organization. So kind of having this, I totally agree with what Franco said in terms of like, hey, there are a few certain business critical KPIs where you would need to use using a dashboard, right? And then you then augment them with a self-service tool where you just start asking questions and you get answers, and you can build more centralized intelligence around it, like what data is being used, what is being consumed, how are people, what are your hotspots in your data, perhaps, right? So that you can optimize access around it as opposed to just trying to figure out what's going on in your org based on all this million dashboards.
Right, right. And we got about 2.5 minutes left. I'll throw it over to Franco. The other thing you could do with these models, these large language models in particular, if they are embedded and connected to your systems, is ask it, how can we improve things? Right? I mean, you can ask it very basic questions. And again, it may not give you the right answer, but it will give you answers. And those could lead to all kinds of different things, right? I mean, you could actually just ask it, how can we improve our architecture and see what it says, right? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just looking for it. So this isn't actually interesting. So I've seen the evolution of this at Databricks. When we launched system tables late last year, people all of a sudden got access to all this rich metadata about what's going on with the Databricks deployments, right? And a lot of our SAs created these really awesome tools, dashboards that would look at all the data and through a rat's nest of case statements used to give a recommendation. Well, and then Gen AI came along, and then now I have essays who create Genie rooms with all the system tables, and you just ask it questions about, hey, how can I make any optimizations, or can I do anything to make my queries faster, or can I do anything to make my platform cheaper? And it's super interesting, the stuff that's been coming out of their woodwork. So absolutely. On Databricks, we launched the system tables last year, and now these Genie data rooms. And so now customers are able to do exactly that. And it's pretty fun watching what they create.
I mean, honest to goodness, that is just so fascinating because historically, I like your comment about rat's nest. Historically, it is so difficult to get deep into the weeds like that. And you have to be a very, very intelligent, very savvy person to sort of manage all that data in your head, connect the dots, and figure out what's going on. Well, these models don't have to be like that. I mean, they already have the capability from their inference layers and all kinds of things that are going on to be able to reveal that to you. And so I think it's like, we had a guy on last year made a really good point about AI and machine learning, and he goes, you know what the most important thing is now? Learning, and it's human learning about how these things work and what things they can do and which things they do especially well, and then just being able to have the humility to say, you know what, the machine is probably right when it gives me these answers. Not always right. You always want a human in the loop with these things. You don't want a fully autonomous AI agent, folks. I promise you. You want, perhaps largely autonomous AI agent doing things. You want to monitor it, be able to control it, curb it, shepherd it, all that kind of fun stuff. But nonetheless, like the answers you can get about deep technical architectural concepts is absolutely stunning. But don't touch that dial, folks. We'll be right back. You are listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back here on DM Radio talking to two experts from Databricks and DataChat, and they're giving us details on their analytic engines and how things are changing. And Rogers, I'll throw this one over to you. I had this thought going to the Boomi conference last year, so maybe almost a year ago, that if you have the right architecture and you're leveraging these large language models responsibly, what you should be able to do, even if you use a small language model, and there's still a pretty big debate about that, whether that's the way to go, or do you use the bigger ones and just have governance rails and things involved. But I thought to myself, a forward-looking company could take a small language model, train it on all their data, and I mean their systems data, their communications, their inventory, customer data, whatever it is that they own. And so now it's their model. And then you set up your RAG model with a vector database, and you set up Kafka streams, for example, from all these systems, your ERP, CRM, et cetera, into this vector database, well, then the senior executives and maybe even on down the line would have what I call an executive cockpit where they can just sit there and ask questions all day long. Like, where are we in terms of spend in marketing and results and ROI for Q1? Enter and just gives you questions. If we have to lay some people off, who should we think about laying off? Or how can we cut costs? Give you all these different ideas. And I'm thinking to myself, think about how dramatically that changes the nature of meetings with your key direct reports, for example. It used to be you had to wait to the meeting, or maybe they submitted something in advance. You had to sit there and read it. Well, now the senior executives can just ask questions all day, bring someone in, and they already know what they want to talk about because they can look at the data, they can look at what's happening. To me, that is a just massive transformation about executive management and how you actually run your organization and how you are truly data driven, because now you can see across, through, down, sideways, all throughout the organization. That's a huge change in how you should manage your company. What do you think, Rogers?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And typically, if you think of even during the era of self-analytics, if an exec needs some insight, they'll probably have to go down to their data team, say like, hey, I need to this particular KPIs, I need some information around it. Can you create this for me? So based on how busy the data team is, it'll come back within days. It may come back within weeks, right? So that's kind of the problem that self-service analytics sought to solve initially. But even before AI, which exec is going to learn a tool to click up 10 buttons to say, like, hey, this is how
Right.
we need to join first before I get an answer to this question. Even though they have set up the data team has set up views, no one is going to do it. So with the language models that can learn based on your company's context, and the more power here is you can just ask questions in plain English, just like you're thinking here. You don't have to
Right.
translate it into terms that someone understands. Just ask it in English and you
Right.
get the answer back. So that's an extremely powerful thing to have.
Yeah, that's just crazy. And Franco, I remember literally what it's 2025 now, so 24 years ago when I was working at this consultancy in Austin, we were talking about BI for the masses and like democratizing data and real-time data warehousing and all these exciting topics. And way back then, it's like you had a handful of people who were using business intelligence. To to Roger's point, if it's a complicated tool, most senior executives aren't going to sit around and use that. But it's not complicated to ask questions in natural language. That's a very easy thing to do, and I think it's going to be so attractive to executives to do this because it's so easy, because you can learn so much that it is really going to revolutionize how people run their businesses, how they advance their businesses, how they make decisions about where to invest money. I mean, I think this is going to absolutely change everything in terms of how we run our operations. What do you think?
Completely agree. I wrote this kind of fictional piece about like the average day of an exec, and kind of how they would work. And I think, I might be a little crazy, but I think one day we're all going to have like our own bots that are going to be constantly like worrying about what we worry about on our behalf. And they're constantly checking all of the things, and they're just kind of like notifying you. Like all of a sudden, hey, we're noticing that revenue is dipping in the Southwest region. It looks like one rep is kind of laying back a little bit. Do you want me to send a notification to the manager? Maybe something like that. I don't know. I'm dreaming a little. Maybe I'm hallucinating a little bit. The one thing I would say that was the most interesting perspective that I got when talking to founders and executives about like what would be the future if we had these agents that we really could rely on. Let's say we cross the chasm of the getting accurate answers, right? And we're there, and kind of one somebody had postulated, I know I can get the right answer. What questions should I be asking?
Right.
And I was like, well, that's like the next thing. Like, what should I be worrying about? What should I be looking at? And what, from an executive's perspective, they have to juggle a lot of balls in the air, right? They're managing a large book, a large business unit, what have you. Really, if you could cut down the time that they go, asking all these questions and focus, like, well, what are the top 3 questions I should be asking this quarter? That's just a little bit more powerful. So yeah, getting the right answer, I think, is where we're stuck now. But then, getting AI to tell us what are the right questions to ask, kind of like Douglas Adam postulated back in the Hitchhiker's Guide. Are we asking the right question? I don't know, but the answer is 42.
We always love bringing that into the equation here. And, Roger, so I'll throw it over to you real quick. Knowing which questions to ask is possibly the most important thing any executive can know, because you can get somewhere quickly. And to Franco's point here, once we have these agents monitoring things, you can monitor what your competition does. You can monitor what the market is doing right now, what the prices are for certain things. The better you get at sort of assessing the reality around you and being able to change how your business operates accordingly, the closer you get to a fully optimized, efficient business. What do you think, Rogers?
Yeah, so that's a great perspective to have, especially as execs, pretty much they're juggling a lot of things, and you need to have information at your fingertips to focus on the important things. And some of the important questions that you ask is also depend on the context and the information you have. And now, if you have something that can offload that step for you, that knows all the context around you, to say like, hey, you know what, I noticed this is happening, or maybe this is something else that's going on out there. You may want to consider examining this particular perspective in your data and what's going on. That's going to be immensely valuable, because that's something you typically would spend a lot of time trying to get that information, and then
Right.
do it a lot more post hoc. But now you can get a lot of this real time, where the AI is doing some of this groundwork for you, and you are empowered to think more business centric and ask those questions.
Yeah, and you can respond more quickly, and I think that's more important than it ever has been, whether it's pricing or products that you're offering, services that you're offering. When you see these sudden dips in behavior and activity, it's like, uh-oh, what's happening there? Or spikes, for example. Oh, what's happening on the good side? To be able to quickly get those answers and then pivot accordingly is going to be, I think, hugely important. What do you think, Rogers?
Yes, yeah. So specifically, like when you're trying to make a decision, like I said before, you need the best possible information you have about the context to make the decision effectively. And it can be like, and a lot of this can be real time. With all the data infrastructure now, we can get data in real time. But how do we make human processing of that information easier in real time, so that you can quickly make the decisions? And that's where the information bottleneck was before, where you had to look at different pieces of information, synthesize it by yourself to make the decision. But now, with AI that can look more efficiently at unstructured data, you can have something that synthesizes that information for you, and kind of, let's say, present it in nice nuggets or snippets that is easy for you to consume, to make the decisions, whether to make pivots, or to or stay course, or whatever that is. So that's very exciting.
Well, and you bring up an excellent point here. We should talk about that in the final segment, which is that natural language processing and these large language models and small language models and NLP in general have allowed us to finally synthesize these two worlds of structured data versus unstructured data. And I'm old enough to remember that in the old days, you had to strip out all the context to get the numbers through thin pipes to slow processors and expensive storage. Well, that now the pipes are fat, the processors are much more capable of crunching numbers, the storage is cheap, so all those dynamics changed. And now with the NLP capabilities that we have, you can really get all the context. You can understand what is happening, not just the numbers, because a number with no context is basically meaningless. It's like 42 from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's amazing how prescient they were back then thinking through this stuff, because that's exactly correct. I mean, the number can have tremendous value if you understand the context, and the context can turn that number inside out or upside down. It just depends on what's actually happening and what that all means. But we'll pick that up after the break, folks. And if you want to be on the show, send me an email, info@dmradio.biz. That comes right to me. We're talking to Franco Patano and Rogers Jeffrey Leo John. We'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, time to get right back to the nitty gritty here on a fantastic episode of DM Radio. We're talking to Franco Patano of Databricks and Rogers Jeffrey Leo John of DataChat. And Franco, you have a great idea about abstracting away the complexity of the compute layer, and I'm guessing that observability has something to do with all that. But tell us what you mean by that.
Sure. So one of the things that a lot of customers at Databricks, and it's not just Databricks, it's all the vendors in the space, It's basically like you have to choose the compute in order to execute your job or your query. And so like we have warehouses where we typically thought the warehouse was my compute layer. In the Hadoop realm, you had Hadoop cluster. You know, we've heard about clusters, and now we have the stack. And at Databricks, we have our own Spark stack
Mm.
that processes it. But essentially, the compute layer is very, very complicated, and planning for your needs when on-prem was like horrible. Now in the cloud, it's elastic and we kind of can choose. But now you got to choose all these configurations. It's like, well, do I need this? Do I need that? What VM do I need? And it's like, dude, oh, man, as a user, I have code. I need to execute it. Can't you just do it? But if you look at it from a planning perspective, like you talked about observability, why do people want observability? Well, I want observability because I want to know, did the stuff I'm paying for, are they using it? Is it fully saturated? What are my utilization metrics? Like, am I getting what I'm paying for out of what I'm spending in the cloud? And that's kind of what we're boiling down. I don't really know that we've kind of solved this problem per se, but it's something that we're thinking about this year. Maybe you'll hear about something at Data and AI Summit in June. But essentially, how do you take the complexity of I need compute to run my query? How can you just remove that from the user altogether while also giving the business the proper controls to make sure of two things? A, I don't want to make sure that they're not under provisioned, meaning that nothing is moving and it's at glacier's pace, and making sure they're not over provisioned. I'm not
Right.
spending for a 5XL and I'm only utilizing 2%, right? How do you Goldilocks all these things? Again, I don't think we've solved it, but like, how do we solve this confluence of problems of the complexity of choosing the right compute, planning for the
Right.
right compute, and then ensuring proper utilization, and then ensuring that we're surfacing all these metrics that are up to the users and to the business folks in the system tables. It's kind of like a confluence of things that we're working on.
Well, and you're reminding me of something, and I always love to go back in time to understand the challenges that we were dealing with. If you go way back into the 1990s and look at companies like Yahoo, for example, what were they focused on? They were trying to figure out how to scale up and then scale back down accordingly, right? For like Black Friday, for example, because historically, before that, you would have to provision as many servers as necessary for peak load, and then you're paying for that the rest of the year. And that is a cost burden that will just kill companies, right? Otherwise, you just hit this brick wall. And now it's like we've gotten that granularity down to the system architecture. And that, real quick, Franco, that's fascinating stuff, right?
So, or you can do what Amazon did and spin up a whole company called AWS, take your access capacity that you provisioned for Black
Right.
Friday and the Christmas holiday season and sell it as a cloud to everybody else. I mean, dealer's choice what you want to do. I don't think you could do it now, but absolutely. Like, how do you plan for that capacity? You could do it either way. You could either waste the money or you could have a whole new business model for sure.
Wow. And hats off to the folks at Amazon. I mean, somehow they got a 10-year head start on the cloud. Like 10 years. Like Microsoft is like waiting, Oracle is waiting, and meanwhile, like pushing forward. Rogers, Jeffrey, I'll throw it over to you for final thoughts here about where you see things going and what excites you and what gets you up every morning.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So, specifically on the topic of this compute, so since we like from data chat perspective, we sit on top of warehouses and we need to run workloads. One of the things that we always kind of are dealing with is, do we scale up or scale out? Like, do we kind of go from a 4x to a 5x instance, or do we just throw like a bunch of 10x instance, like 3x instances and be done with the problem? So that is a very challenging question to answer. It requires a whole lot of things. You need to measure your workload. There is observability, and then there is a human making the decision. And if AI could make the decision for me, I think that would be a great thing. So yeah.
Well, and just to get back to the observability thing, because I'm so fascinated by this, and I think a lot of the movement in that space stemmed out of Kubernetes, frankly, because Kubernetes comes along, you can now distribute compute. It's very, very interesting, very powerful engine that Google came up with, but it also created all these other challenges. So all these other, sort of data points sprang out, and we had to figure out a way to absorb them. that's what these models can do extremely well. So all of a sudden, you don't have to try to wrap your head around all that stuff. You just ask the model to tell you what the heck is going on. And it's just a night and day change, right, Rogers? Real quick.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, like you you're not you can dynamically provision infrastructure based on your workloads, and that's really a game changer. And what is even more exciting to me is all of these serverless data warehouses stuff that's coming up. Essentially, like, yeah, sure, you can provision it elastically using Kubernetes and whatnot, but there's still this amount of time when workloads die down, and then you're still left with some idle capacity, and that kind of the cost multiplies based on the amount of compute that you spun up. So having this enormous amount of compute available to us for a tiny amount of time on
Right.
demand,
Right.
and not having to worry about the cost anytime else, and that's a complete game changer.
Well, I remember, and I'll kind of close on this, many years ago. Gosh, I guess this is 16 years ago or so. I was chatting for the first time with my partner, Dr. Robin Bloor, about the cloud and how the cloud really changes things. And I said, it's from a military perspective, it's almost like being able to rent an F-35 for 4 hours to go take care of some problem around the world instead of having to build out a whole manufacturing supply chain to create these things. That is just a huge change in dynamics and what's possible. And so you really just do have to wrap your head around what you can do, what you want to do. And now you can kind of spin that stuff up. You can vet ideas. I mean, that's the other really cool side of things, right? Is that determining which direction to go really hinges on A, good ideas, and B, being able to test those ideas quickly to see, is this going to work or not? And we can now do all that thanks to technologies like DataChat and Databricks. Well, folks, look these gentlemen up online. Franco Patano of Databricks and Rogers Jeffrey Leo John of DataChat. Send me an email, info@dmradio.biz, so you can be on the show. It's going to be a fun year, folks. I love this stuff. We'll talk to you next time. You've been listening to DM Radio.